Hello, everybody. Doing my 10 good minutes today. And my hope for you is that I will not bore you and I will try not to waste your time. Anyway, today I want to talk about stories as lab and stories as temple. And I got this coinage of lab and temple from a Russian novel called Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev, written in the second half of the 19th century. Anyway, that's not important right now. I'll talk about that novel at another time. It's one of my faves. It's really good. I've taught it for a number of years. But anyway, in the novel, the main character, he's a nihilist. He's actually the first named nihilist in all of literature, but his name is Bazarov, and he says that nature is not a temple, but nature is a workshop. And what he basically means by this is that nature is not something to sort of be worshipped, but rather something to sort of roll your sleeves up with and kind of move around like a mechanic is moving matter. We need to stop sort of standing on ceremony and being so precious about nature. Now, we can sort of get into that argument about what it means and what he's really talking about and all those sorts of things. Um, but what I want is to make a claim not about nature, but to make a claim about story. And I think stories are both temple and lab. Right? They are an arena in which a we watch the what if. What if I take John and stick him in this arena with this pressure, right? And so it's a little bit of a viewing situation. And so we, of course, have been telling stories, forever. That's not the thing. But I'm kind of want to think about this that in stories we watch ourselves because in stories we tell ourselves, we call ourselves so that we can watch ourselves or versions of ourselves. And I think insofar as we see what a character would do if we place this kind of pressure on him, then we can extract some kind of power out of seeing the what if. And so take like one of the first stories of one of the great first stories of Western civilization, Homer's Iliad. We take the character of Achilles, and you can sort of bring into this all of the power and might of Achilles and what he represents. And Homer, being a master storyteller, starts us as late as possible, and he starts off with the offense of the commander, Agamemnon, um, injuring Achilles' merit. And the reason why I'm talking like that is because I happen to be teaching Paradise Lost right now, which is all about Satan and his injured merit. And I think Milton is doing some interesting things there with taking a classical story and sort of putting it in a slightly different arena. But I digress. My point here is that what would the greatest of all warriors do if his commander, the authority who he submits to, offends his honor and offends his majesty? And what does that mean for the war? What does that mean for the divine prophecies? There's all kinds of interesting what ifs, and we can kind of look at that. And so Achilles is a kind of what if. What would inspire Achilles to stay out of this war, which will afford him the opportunity to make himself the greatest warrior of all time? What would possibly inspire him to take himself out of this opportunity? After all, Achilles is the one who has had to choose between a short, glorious life and a long and enduring, meaningful life, right? So, sort of two different strategies for meaning: short and glorious, or long and enduring, and a little bit less dramatic, right? So these are the sort of the pulls, and that's always the pull of the hero in the Homeric register. But my point here, or in the point, what I'm trying to get at is that we can watch this what if because we can insert a bunch of different confounds into the experiment. So you can kind of see that Homer is using story as a kind of a lab to see what will happen. And not going to get too into the story, but well, why not? Why not? We've got a few minutes here. I'm only halfway into my 10 good minutes, and I want to flesh out this lab thing before we get into the temple part of it. And so, uh, you know, it is only through watching his best friend Patroclus, who has taken on his armor. Uh, Homer has Achilles watch himself die in battle, which is a remarkable, truly remarkable meta narrative within this original narrative. It's so complex, it's so complex and so beautiful and so wonderful that we get kind of lost. I think we forget how amazing it is. So Achilles is in essence watching what would happen if he goes into battle. And so then, of course, with the death of Patroclus through Hector, Achilles is stirred, right? Opponent processing, he's stirred to re enter the fray, to put his injured merit, to put his honor on the back burner because he wants to avenge the death of his best friend, which is sort of oddly acting as his sort of substitute. So anyway, it's a wonderful thing, and the Lindy quality of Homer is certainly not something that people need me to say. He endures for a reason. Homer's stories, the Achilles, the Iliad and the Odyssey are Lindy, not through any kind of conspiracy theory, but they really are that good. They are that wonderful, and it is one of the origins of this notion of story as a lab by which we can see the peculiar pulls of our humanity, this sort of in between being that we are. We're not quite animals and we're not quite gods. We're heroes or called to heroes. At least that's how I read Homer. That we, though might not live as dramatic a life as Achilles, we are called to a kind of heroism because heroism is learning to come to terms with our own mortality. So now then, what do I mean that stories are also a temple? So stories are a lab that we can see what would happen, but the collections of stories become that place where we go to worship, and we worship by paying attention. And so you have these collections of stories that we revisit and that we watch and that we pay attention to as a kind of act of worship. Now, I'm going to make a strange move here. I think that being a high school teacher for over 20 years in total has taught me that high school is a fascinating lab by which I have had a front row seat in watching young people wrestle with mimetic desire and unconscious action. And I don't mean this in any kind of creepy sort of way, but one of the things that I try so desperately to teach my students is to become conscious of their unconscious motivations, to become conscious of um, desire that they are, for whatever reason, ignorant of. It's a real problem I've noticed in life that people are not always terribly conscious of what is motivating them. And so that if they can learn to both participate in with each other, but also watch each other, I think it might yield a kind of insight in ways that might afford wisdom. The other day I was talking here in my 10 good minutes about this idea that we need something by which we can render a comparison about what we're going through. And so, in part, the power of literature as lab and temple, stories as lab and temple, is that it gives us something by which we can make sense out of that which is presented to us as senseless. How many times do you find yourself in a situation where, like, I don't know why this is happening. I don't know what is going on. And my students sort of feel this all the time. And this is a sort of an acute problem of your teenage years. If those of you in my audience who are older know, right? That the peculiar characteristic or the peculiar character of being a high school student is sort of constantly being sort of surprised, like what the heck's going on, and a kind of desperation that can come in. So if we can give our students stories, and if we can help them see stories as lab and as temple, I think it will start giving them some kind of terra firma with which they can stand on to see more clearly. And I would say to you, as someone, as an adult who lives in high school, how's that? Um, this is a lesson that adults need too. That great books give us this this ruler or this sort of measuring stick or this comparison that will give us an entree into the great temple of wisdom. So, stories are our laboratory, and stories are our places of worship, the places where we pay attention to. And so, come along, let's do this journey of wisdom together. Cheers. Have a great weekend. Bye.